July 6th meeting of the Norwalk Shellfish Commission at 1917. And has attendance been taken? Again, the chair notes that a quorum is present. Bill, do we have attendance? Looks like you might be frozen.
Yes, we do.
Okay, yeah, your video is frozen, Bill. Approval.
Yeah,
Approval of the minutes, if we could, from the June meeting. I think, Pete, I don't know if you were in attendance in June, were you?
I came in the end,
Oh, yeah, okay.
so I
So,
wasn't there the whole time, so I have to sustain.
all right, then, so let's move that on to next month. Public comment. I see that we have one attendee. If the attendee would like to be recognized, if she could raise her hand, please. Seeing that she has not,
no,
we'll move on to the treasurer's report. Mr. Mooney.
okay. So as of June 30th, the current balance is $27,213.17.
Bill, we lost you at the end there. Could you just give the figure again?
Sure. The ending balance for June 30th was $27,213.17.
Thank you, sir. No secretary's report. We'll move on to the committee reports. Again, Bill. Department of
Okay.
Health.
For the month of June, rainfall was 1.79. Last year, it was 4.26. And traditionally or historically, it's 4.15. So it was quite a bit less than normal. There were no closures and no bypasses.
Thank you very much, sir. Wastewater treatment plant, there is no one here. Chairman Schnierlein, if you'd like to reiterate what you said in Mayor's Water Quality in terms of their attendance.
I had requested on 3 occasions that one of the individuals from the treatment plant come to the meetings, and I was told point blank that we're more than welcome to go to their meetings and participate and ask questions there, but they were not going to send somebody to participate in our meetings.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
And if you would continue, the Mayor's Water Quality Committee.
Okay, we just had our meeting, and of due note was the fact that PFAS is going to be continued to be monitored by Dick Harris. And he's right now in the process of trying to experiment with 2 different methods of monitoring. One is fairly cheap, the other one is fairly expensive. And he wants to see if there's a correlation between the data that the 2 get. And if they're similar, obviously he'll go with the one that is the least expensive, because right now it's not coming out of the city, it's coming out of Norm Bloom's pocket. And he's trying to be reasonable there. The other thing of note was we had a pretty good discussion on the zoning commission's change, and some of which is for what they call coastal mitigation. But it's also, many of us think that it's a way of disguising how they can get in multiple family housing on Water Street. And it's something that many of us are very much opposed to. And unless our wishes are known, unfortunately, they may go ahead and continue and develop this whole thing without any input and change. To me personally, I don't understand why anybody would put more housing on Water Street. It makes no sense. You're asking people to go to work in a flood zone. And back in the days, in the 70s, I had to go to work in a flood zone when I first moved to Norwalk, because I was living in Rowayton at the time on Bell Island. And during nor'easters, it would flood. One of those times it flooded, I just happened to have appendicitis that night. And the only way I was going to get to the hospital, the ambulance would not come for me, is I had to drive myself to the hospital, which I did, and it cost me brakes all the way around, and it cost me a new clutch. That's what salt water does to a car, and I learned that the hard way, but I got taken care of.
Now, salt water makes a Tesla explode, so that's good.
Yeah,
Hmm.
well, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and anybody, the thing that worries me is most of the people here in Norwalk at north of Water Street have probably never been on Water Street during a high tide. And they don't realize what happens there. And every time it floods, there's a car that thinks, oh, it's not that deep, and they drive through it. And imagine putting a few hundred people in that position where they have to do it to get in or out to go to work.
The sad part, the water's rising too,
Yes,
so
Yeah.
it's gonna get deeper.
yep, and it's we're not even talking nor'easters. We're talking just a normal high tide,
Right.
a good spring high tide, and it happens once a month. And when they say it doesn't happen that often, these are people that don't live there and have worked there or played there. And for those of us that have done that, it's a sad commentary. So I don't want to go on it. Just, I'm like Peter, it gets my blood pressure up. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Permits. Do we have any news? Bill, I'm wondering if maybe this week we could find out how many permits they have left at Fisherman's World, such that we could deduct from the number that they were given to see where we are year to date.
Sure, I could do that for next meeting.
Oh, that would be great. Also, I'd like the commissioners to come up with any changes they would like to see for the permits for next year in terms of their content or anything else outside the box. I would like the permits from now on to have an email address such that we can build a database, which we do not have. One that we could even subdivide by resident, non-resident, etc. The Marine Unit, Sergeant Bisegli, thank you for coming. I know you have a previous engagement, sir.
That's okay. Glad I can be here, guys. So we are currently closed for shell fishing. They closed it after the fireworks. I believe for 1 or 2 days. They're to let us know when to reopen it. Other than that, it's been pretty quiet on our end. Nothing significant to report.
Thank you, Sergeant. Advisory, anyone know the water temperature, Pete?
So we were out there today. It was actually like 74 or so, 73.
Wow.
Yeah, it's climbing up quick.
Yeah, it was 78 last night for the fireworks. And it dropped a little bit today, but still in the mid to high 70s.
Outstanding. It's okay for me to go in now.
Me too. I don't go if it's below 70.
No. Norwalk Harbor Management Commission, Chairman Kibbe and Mr. Stedman, please, sirs.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Bartosz. Yeah, we've on the mooring front, the mooring committee, we've been making record collections on abandoned moorings or people who have had moorings that they haven't paid for their mooring permit in 2 or 3 years. So Harbor Master's been pretty aggressive about collecting on that. So we have several thousand extra dollars coming in due to that effort. With our transit mooring program, we've got 4 moorings. 2 are certainly installed. The other 2 may be already installed. I haven't seen them, but there are 2 near Fitch Point near the light there that are dock bomb moorings that are similar to what the Shellfish Commission has in the 5 Mile River. for $40 a night. And we've really been overwhelmed with inquiries about those. The difficulty is it's a shallow harbor, so those are really 4 or 5 foot draft is all you can put there. We're also putting 2 moorings out in the Sheffield Harbor, north of Sheffield Island, and to the east of the dock at the lighthouse. So that, and there's been interest in that already. I mean, it's pretty astonishing how many people have been calling, trying to book those. We're also working with the Seaport Association to, with our dock walk account, to manage the 4 moorings that they already have there in the Sheffield Island Basin there, right by their dock. The harbor master and I have spent a lot of time locating our moorings because we never had that in the past. So we've sort of used my Navionics software so that now I have 200 extra waypoints on my chart plotter when I go out. But we've located all of the moorings at Peach Island, the South Anchorage up the river, East Basin, and all the way out to Shore and Country Club, out to the end of that point. So Gregory Point. So we're making progress with that. We were able to overlay that those locations on top of the desired barge locations for the walk bridge construction, and that again doesn't seem to be a huge problem. Have suggested to DOT that rather than the Harbor Commission moving those moorings, since there's so few that have to be relocated, that the contractor doing the barge mooring installation work be paid a little extra to relocate the harbor moorings that have the recreational moorings that need to be moved. We've had discussions with the DOT down at the walk bridge. We're a little concerned about manpower for all of the security that's going to have to be provided per the Army Corps of Engineers restrictions, and any more future restrictions that are put on the work site by the DEP, which we don't know anything about what may came from there. So there's a really question of having time and people and addressing that issue early rather than waiting till we've got stuff going on and nobody there to look after the 2 vessels, between the bridge vessels, the Maritime Aquarium and the Seaport Association, and anything else like rowers and things like that are just moseying through. Eversource, we for their preliminary application for permitting the power cables being relocated into the harbor, we've shown no objection to that going forward, and we've attempted to in a narrative add some conditions to their request, and that any in a nutshell, any extra cost the city would bear for in constructing something down there, the difference between building it with the power cables underwater or without the power cables underwater, we've asked that the Eversource be responsible for that, the delta in cost. We don't know if they're going to fight for that or not. That's about all I have at this point. Any questions for me?
Well, thanks, Alan. Jeff?
The only other topic that we talked about at the water quality meeting is the pending rezoning of the waterfront. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or later, but that's I think that's one of the most significant matters before the commission now. But that's the other pending thing, Steve. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now or after you get through the Eversource.
I think it'd be okay to present it now. I think most here have seen it, except for Sergeant Bisegli, and especially now for the benefit of Commissioner Sack. So if you would, Jeff.
I don't want to, and also, Alan, was not part of the last meeting.
Ah, yes.
So I
Yeah,
don't know,
true, true.
Joe and Pete and John can
Yep.
work on
Yeah,
something else.
if you would.
Right, thank you. We talked about at the water quality meeting, the significance of the rezoning, proposed rezoning. And with respect to the Harbor Commission's interests, of course, the interest is the rezoning of the waterfront. And we had there was an interesting presentation that was given to a joint meeting of the Harbor Commission and the Shellfish Commission. And at the same time that work is going on, there's also the resiliency study that's ongoing, addressing the same area that's being proposed for redevelopment. So we thought that, not to be critical of anything now, what's being proposed, but that it would be good for the people who have to make these decisions to understand the context within which they're being made, including the historical context. And so we talked at the last meeting about the relationship between the proposed rezoning and the Connecticut Coastal Management Act, and also Norwalk's municipal coastal program. And I think I mentioned at the last meeting that a friend of mine who retired from the Corps of Engineers and the Army after over 40 years. And in fact, he was a lawyer, and he brought the original legal actions against the people in the East Norwalk Basin who built their docks without Corps permits, and which in effect started the harbor management program. But that's another topic. But he mentioned before he retired how they were in the Corps recognizing that issues that they thought they had addressed at one time came back after about 30 years or so. And that's because, of course, the people who were involved in the solution the first time locally are no longer there. The historical record is not preserved. And of course, some people don't care about the historical record. So the proposed revision of the zoning really to talk about what took place going back in the relationship to coastal management, I think is quite significant. And we talked about the Federal Coastal Management Act in 1972, the dual goals of which are to guide beneficial use of the coastal area, but to protect coastal resources and to achieve a balance between that. And that of course was approved and passed by Congress because of the concern, not the concern, but the fact that so many people live in the coastal areas of the United States, and there's such development pressure, and the resources are sensitive. So that act authorized the states, coastal states, to establish their own programs, which is what Connecticut did. And it's interesting, going back, the Connecticut Coastal Management Act was passed in 1978 and effective in 1979. And it's interesting to look at the what they call the legislative history of that, which is scanned available in the state library now. And there was a number of public hearings before that act was passed. And the one in Stamford was attended by a number of people from Norwalk who expressed their support for the bill. And at that time, the mayor was Mayor Collins. And so he wasn't there, but he had a letter of support read into the record for him. And there were other well-known names from Norwalk who also testified. So that coastal when that act was passed, it's implemented both by the state, it was the DEP then, regulatory programs, but also municipal programs. And that act set up the provisions for municipal coastal programs. So it's implemented in part through land use decisions by planning and zoning authorities. And that in part is through the coastal site plan review process. But part of the implementation of that Coastal Management Act and in Norwalk and other towns was the establishment of what the act described or authorized as municipal coastal programs. And those were changes to the master plans, as they were called then, and also the zoning regulations. So at the time the act was passed in Connecticut, at 78, Norwalk already had established a coastal area management advisory board. And that also consisted of people whose names I'm sure you'll recognize a number of them. And they worked first to develop amendments to Norwalk's plan of development or master plan. And that was accomplished in 1982. And the mayor at that time was Mayor O'Connor. So Mayor Collins, he came again after Mayor O'Connor. But that was done in 1982. And it's interesting to look at that old report because it doesn't look very good. It's typed on a typewriter, and you know, when you make a mistake, you cut out the paragraph and you paste it over another one, and the maps were hand drawn. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a good report. I mean, it wasn't done by a consultant. It didn't have glossy maps or, you know, a big, thick, the whole number of pages. But there was thought that went into it by a number of people who lived in Norwalk and were trying to do a good job. So that was approved by the Common Council in 82. But the next part, to complete Norwalk's municipal coastal program, was the amendments to the zoning regulations. And that took time to do. And the focus of that work was on the Water Street area. And that was the focus on that was to establish the Marine Commercial District. And the purpose of that was, the main focus of that work then was to protect water dependent uses. And as you might imagine, the property owners at the time, some of the same arguments are being made now, objected to restrictions on what they could build in that area. And the argument was that, well, if we're restricted in what we can build, we may not be able to maintain the water dependent uses that you want. And so that went on for a while, and it was finally in 1988 that the Marine Commercial District was passed. And at that time there was a Planning and Zoning Commission. So Bill, again, I know you've heard this, I'll share my screen maybe and
You're free to do so, Jeff. Go ahead.
bore people again here. Let's see. So this, once the city, well, I guess it hasn't come up yet. Participants can now see your application. All right. So this is an invitation that I got in 1988 to attend what was a ceremony at the Maritime Center. And I think it was just about that time that the Maritime Center opened, either then or the year before. But this was in effect a ceremony held by the DEP and the city of Norwalk to acknowledge that Norwalk had completed its municipal coastal program. So this is an invitation from the Mr. Rock at the time, who later became the DEP commissioner. But again, I read this before. The development of Norwalk's municipal coastal program began in 81, initiated and completed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and the staff under the Connecticut Coastal Management Act. The primary goal of the program is the effective management, use, development, and preservation of Norwalk's coastal land and water resources. And the program consists of amendments to the plan of development, which were adopted in 82, and subsequent zoning and regulation changes necessary to implement the plan. The final changes, meaning the zoning regulations, the Marine Commercial District, were recently adopted, culminating over 7 years of dedicated work. So that's a lot of time that people in Norwalk spent working on this. And my thought is that the zoning commissioners now who are considering this should recognize that, and that should be part of when they make their decisions. They should know all this background stuff because people did work before them, and that shouldn't be lost, in my opinion. So the final changes recently adopted, 7 years of dedicated work. From its inception, this program, in conjunction with the state's Coastal Management Act, has resulted in significant gains in protection and enhancement of water-dependent facilities, public access, preservation of coastal resources, and it will serve an even greater role in guiding future resources and development. But you notice that back then, the emphasis was on water-dependent uses. The issue of flooding and development in the floodplain it probably was discussed, but it wasn't a big deal. The emphasis was on water-dependent uses. And then something else, let me just get out of this for a second. And I'll share once again my screen, if you don't mind. And here are these old newspaper articles. And again, sorry to go on about this, and I didn't make a formal presentation, just talking. But this issue of the rezoning of Water Street back then, this is from 1982 to 1988. that took that long, and some of the issues are, as I said, exactly the same now. So this is this is the way we kept records of newspaper articles back then. We cut them out and made a photocopy of them. So the zoning for Water Street was going to restrict further development to protect water dependent uses. And again, for the purpose of preserving marine commerce, that was the issue. And this work was being done by the planning and zoning staff and the planning and zoning commission. And as I said, there were objections from the property owners. And they were arguing that it was taking property, taking away development rights, and it was unfair. And they had a group, and they obtained retained legal counsel to challenge this. And this is the area. Of course, we all know it. It's the whole Water Street area, down to including the South Norfolk Boat Club. Then in '88, the zone was finally adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then I mentioned that invitation I got to signify the completion of the municipal coastal program. And the state of Connecticut, the DEP at the time, they supported the zone. And again, I'm just going through these quickly. It's very interesting to read, going back and read these old articles and recall the discussions. But then the Water Street property owners sued. So soon after that regulation was adopted, the Planning and Zoning Commission was split up into separate planning and zoning commissions, and the new zoning commission changed the marine commercial district and made it less restrictive. Oh, I take it back. They didn't make it less restrictive yet. After it was passed and the Planning and Zoning Commission was split, the former Planning and Zoning Commission was sued for the adoption of that zone. And then the new zoning commission considered new regulations, which the Planning Commission opposed. The new Planning Commission opposed, but those regulations were adopted anyway by the new zoning commission. And if you look at these old newspaper articles, I just put a couple of them here. The money factor: who will profit from development? And then there was the discussion again. It's the same arguments that are being made now that you hear, except this time they're not just made by the property owners. That Planning and Zoning is talking about the economic benefits to be achieved by the new development. And then after the new zoning commission adopted the new marine commercial district, DEP sued the zoning commission for failure to comply with the Coastal Management Act, amending the marine commercial district, a whole number of things that they identified in their suit against the zoning commission. Now that suit did not go to court. It was settled out of court. And when I talked with Mr. Rock, who later became the DEP commissioner, who's retired up in Maine, but I talked with him, he doesn't recall the exact the settlement agreement, but he said that he would not have agreed to a settlement agreement that in any way diminished the authority of the DEP and the authority of the Coastal Management Act. But there's no record of this in the Attorney General's office. That DEP is now searching in its archives to try to figure out what the agreement was. But that may be the point of bringing this all up, is that in some ways history is repeating itself now with respect to that marine commercial district. But there's an added factor of consideration, and that's the development in the floodplain. And as I mentioned back then, that was not presented as an issue. Now it is. And it's been an issue and brought up by DEP in other towns where proposals have been made to change the zoning regulations. So in addition to the effect of the redevelopment on the marine commercial uses, and this is brought about in part too, because the proposed new zoning changes would eliminate half of the marine commercial district and put it into an urban mixed use district that would provide additional density for residential development. So now we have this sort of competing objectives for this area. One, it's identified as an area that requires resilience planning, and it's recognized as an area vulnerable to floods. And it's also an area being proposed for increased residential density. So how do those two circumstances get resolved and worked out in a thoughtful manner that serves the overall public interest? And that's where we are now. The commission will comment on this, and so will Deep will comment on this. And we know, and Deep has shared their responses in other towns, but Deep's response in other towns has been that proposals that would increase residential density in the coastal floodplain are inconsistent with the Coastal Management Act and shouldn't be approved. So that's where we are. And the purpose of me saying this, I think, is to not lose the historical record and not lose the understanding or the recognition of what people did for almost a decade in Norwalk to try to work on this program. If you do something different, that's fine, but please, recognize that it's part of a process, and other residents worked on this for a long time, and their contributions shouldn't be forgotten now when you make a decision now. Thanks, Steve. Sorry for Pete and John and Joe to go over this again.
Not at all, Jeff. Great report, and great report as always by the Harbor Management Commission. Commissioners, any questions for Alan or John or Jeff? Okay, hearing none, I would just like to have a motion to accept the committee reports as read.
I make a motion.
Thank you, Pete. May I have a second, Jordan? Jordan, you don't appear to be muted, but I can't hear you if you'd like to make a second. Looks like he's reconnecting. We'll give him a second. Jordan, do you copy? It looks like Jordan's having some technical difficulties. Let's just let the record show that there was a motion and that there was no second due to technical issues. Let's move on to old business. So as the Harbor Management Commission discussed, they handled the Eversource application during their last meeting. The previous meeting, they tabled this application as we did, pending Mr. Mailman's comments. And his comments could basically be boiled down into a few parts. One, that in his 50 years of experience, that he saw no precedent for going under such a public facility. Secondly, that he mentioned that these casings for future construction would be difficult to find. I know that at some point in all of these years that there was some discussion of putting sort of a leash around the casings and having some sign that went up in the Z axis to indicate where they are, but I don't recall that being in the current app. Anyone have any comment or knowledge of where we are with that? No? Okay. And then last, as has been mentioned, Mr. Mailman discussed the Eversource. We might be interested in having them pay for any modification cost within their exclusion zone, which he indicated would be 50 feet in each direction. So in that axis, that's quite big. So that's 50 feet from the left cable and 50 feet from the right or southern cable. That's a very large zone that we're dealing with. Questions or comments, Pete or Jordan, regarding Mr. Mailman's comments?
I agree with what he said, but didn't they just throw a bone to the city and try to throw us something, or were throwing us something?
They
They
did,
didn't have to do any of this stuff.
they did. And
I think we have to send something to either Army Corps of Engineers or DEP saying that we have to have some coverage, but if things did change,
Mhm.
we shouldn't have to pay for it. They're taking our area and using it when it
Mhm.
could definitely go another way.
Yeah. So, if I may, Norwalk Shellfish Commission ayes the motions that were approved by Harbor Management. I'd like to read them into the record, and if a commissioner would like to move in that direction, I'd welcome it. So in the last meeting, it was moved that Eversource should provide additional information concerning the extent and restrictions of the exclusion zone, such that Eversource would establish around the proposed relocation route. The Norwalk Shellfish Commission has no objection to inclusion of the Eversource pre-submission plans in an application submitted to DEEP, and reserves the right to continue to review the relocation proposal and provide additional comments at such time as it may be modified, additional information provided, or the proposal is subject of a public notice or hearing. In addition, the Norwalk Shellfish Commission recommends a DEEP permit condition specifying that any future actions by the city of Norwalk to maintain, repair, replace, or improve the affected public facilities will not be limited in any significant way by the relocated transmission lines, and that should there be any added cost or delay associated with such city actions as a result of the relocated transmission lines, Eversource or its successors shall be required to assume the added cost and otherwise compensate the city. Full stop.
I make a motion to accept that. You know what I mean? I
Yes,
think we should follow the same in pursuit, same thing. Because that's what I just said, we gotta get covered some way.
Yep.
I mean, all of a sudden we decide we want to extend the docks or do this or change the configuration. We're screwed. We gotta have them come down, mark where everything is. Then how much is it gonna cost to do it? Not worth it.
Well, what's worse, they can say you can't do it. I mean, that's the where that ends. It says, no, that's what an exclusionary zone is. It's, you can't do anything within this swath of riverbed, and that's
Right.
what that is. I also would like to, as a Harbor Commission chair, I will follow up tomorrow with Ken Roberts, who heard that motion, and see how he's doing on getting us that information. The other thing I'm going to ask him is how big the signs are going to be where that cable crossing is, because I don't know that the city is aware of what they'll have in their beautiful South Norwalk riverfront condominium land. If it's going to be like Bridgeport, where the signs are 4 feet by 8 feet, on either side of the river saying cable crossing. So we'll try to get that clarified as part of that discussion as well.
thanks so much, Alan. Jordan, do we have a second of that? Optionally, Jordan, I'd recognize your hand raised electronically. All right, seeing his hand raised electronically.
I do too.
Yep, we have a second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Jordan keeping his hand raised, that passes 3-0. Thank you. So in our communications to DEEP, I'd like to include the question, what may our $10,000 be directed to? The city is being compensated for the movement of the lines from the police department down Elizabeth Street and across Water Street to the HDD pit. The Harbor Management Commission ostensibly is being given some funds, although very little funds in reality, to study and or modify any changes that might be necessary down the line. I would just like to know what our 10,000 is. I'm really curious. I think that it's an interesting gesture. I think if this $10,000 was offered privately and not publicly, it would be called a bribe.
Yep.
So I just want to know what we'd be allowed to use it for.
That's a good question to ask them. You know, is it for us working on docks, which isn't us, we're Shellfish Commission? It should be something towards the shellfishing industry,
Yes,
our natural beds and everything else.
yes. So
What an oyster stand down at the riverfront.
Yeah. 25 cents an oyster.
yes, they were not so long ago.
I know.
Also, the industry has concerns with respect to the grounding and placement of the mooring barges and the use of tugs regarding same, and have requested that Eversource, or excuse me, that DOT post a bond for this portion of the construction. In round numbers, the Connecticut harvest is worth about $32 million a year.
Mhm.
The Norwalk contribution to that is around 50%. And it varies year to year, and whether or not one looks at Darien and Westport Waters as well, bringing that down to about $16 million a year. And I don't think it would be unreasonable, given the potential impact and what has already been seen regarding the Eversource, the NRG lines that were brought across the sound from Manresa to Long Island, that some significant bond be carried. And I'd like to propose that it be 50% of our annual harvest for a bond of $8 million.
Steve, you know, if you check the amount of oysters, I think the aquaculture said something like 80-something% of all oysters come into Norwalk.
Yeah, so 50% is the low end.
Yeah.
And it varies year to year. So
Yeah.
the latest data that we have is pre-pandemic. It's from 2019.
Yeah, and this is the largest amount in any of the towns
It is.
that have oysters coming in.
It
So
is.
we should be able to protect some way.
Yes.
And I saw the mooring layout, and it looks like they really didn't change it too much.
No, it's pretty much what we've seen. Jeff had a
Yeah.
question or comment?
But the mechanism for doing this, excuse me, or requiring this would have to be through now the harbor master's permit process. Is that what you're envisioning?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we have to address with Harbor Master Lavallo. And
Yeah.
I have spoken with him informally. I think I'd like to attach a number to it.
Mhm.
And
I
last,
agree what you're saying.
maybe we'll put that in the form of a motion, Pete. Would you mind so much?
Nope, I'll make a motion to do what you just said. It's easier
Okay.
that way.
So that a bond
a
for
bond be
$8
set
million be as part of the permit conditions for mooring barges for the Walk Bridge construction through Harbor Master Bruce Lavallo.
Right,
Okay.
sounds good.
A second of that, and Jordan, again, you may indicate electronically.
He did.
Seeing that we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Jordan has his hand still raised, and that passes. And maybe last but not least, in terms of Eversource and the bridge, if you remember one of the early presentations that Eversource did with their third-party biologists was to submit what I called at the time a demonstrably false and misleading benthic macroinvertebrate report. there was a subsequent redo of that report. And this is from the penultimate application, the one where the lines were going north of the Donovan Center, the docks, and paralleling 136. This is an application that I believe Shellfish received, but Harbor did not. Am I correct about that?
It was mentioned, but we did not see a formal presentation.
Yeah, which was quite interesting. We did receive documentation. So my question essentially is, which document is, and if there is any document, part of the current application? In looking at the current route, and if you look at the contour lines, and if you remember that discussion that we had with the photographs I presented downstairs in the library at the health department about that paisley or Nike swoosh shaped little oyster reef. It's actually on their map now. So quite interesting.
The one observation about that route that's kind of funny is that the whole the documentation is flawed. The package that the siting council approved shows the route north of the, I mean, they have full set of plans that are attached to their application. It shows the cable route north of our docks and up by the bridge, then curving down and, you know, into the Water Street area. My experience is that drawings always rule over whatever you put in writing and narrative. And so I keep being tempted to just write to the siting commission to say, by the way, which route, you've got two routes in your drawings here, which did you approve? And I don't know if that would get a little bit of steam going, like, what do you mean we, you know, I mean, what do you mean? That's what, because I think they really I do think that whole application process is flawed in that the drawings that are attached to it aren't what they intend to build at all.
Well taken. Thank you, Alan.
Well,
Go ahead, John.
yeah, I was just gonna, you know, I'm sure Eversource realized that, but I thought the main impetus for changing that route was based on the fact that they did not have the territory in which to do the horizontal directional drilling. In other words, they're originally going to use the 68 Water Street area, but since that fell through, they moved it over down to the, was it 92? And then that changed 90. That changed the angle at which they can do that. But you're absolutely right. They presented several iterations, and which one did they approve is, you know, they had, actually, we recall 4 iterations of that proposal. One went directly underneath, actually between the pilings, then under the pilings, and then subsequent to the north of the docks, and then back underneath the pilings. So, you know, it's.
But my point is that there's a very 264-page application that the siting council looked at. Attachment 4 to that extensive document is a whole sheaf of drawings that say plans that really show the earlier route. And again, it's kind of with the engineering background, the drawings, the first things I go to. I don't read all the bullshit paper, the text work. I really go to drawings to find out what's going on, and that's the way why we do drawings in that world. So I don't know if there's any point to pursuing that or not. I don't know if things going to happen. I'm happy to write a letter on behalf of the Harbor Commission to say to Michelle Bachman at the siting council, by the way, what did we don't know what the routes are. The other person.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Let me just finish. The other person is Vanessa Valles, the engineer with our Public Works, who should know what's been approved and what the city signed off on. Maybe we should direct it, get her involved.
I think what you said to the siting council, could you please send us which ones you approve, since we have 4 different styles that were sent to us?
Well, it's not what was sent to us. It's what they have a very formal package of paper that is what they approved, and that's it's very misleading in my view.
Well, I think they should explain it to us in more detail then. I agree.
Jeff, please.
One, I think, good or interesting piece of information or good piece of information that came out of our meeting with Eversource is that for the first time, they talked about and described an exclusion zone. And so that term is sort of self-explanatory. And what does that mean for any work above that exclusion zone that the city might wish to do to?
That means you can't do any. That's what exclusion zone is.
And that's the first time that they said that directly.
Well, I'm sure there's gonna be a buffer zone around that exclusion zone. You know, so that's a significant amount of real estate that we're gonna be negated.
You know, I said this from when they first time they came out with what they were doing. This is what we were having problems with. And now it's getting even worse than what it was.
No question about it. The very first, I remember that very first meeting that we met with Marcia Wellman, but this is water. It means absolutely nothing anymore, you know, because
I know.
city signed off
Right.
on it. This common council agreed to it. The siting council agreed to it. They refused a public hearing. We went and talked to them personally to justify why we needed a public hearing on that.
But
turns
John, remember that the siting council refused a public hearing.
Yes, I said they
The
refused.
there isn't discretion with respect to the DEP.
No,
If
I'm
they
referring to
receive
the
a
siting.
petition for a public hearing, they have to hold a public hearing.
Yeah, no, I was referring to the siting council. as far
Siting
as-
council, yes.
So, you know, we would put our best foot forward in every venue that we looked at,
No.
you know, and there seems to be it seems to be a juggernaut. It's a fait accompli. This is what they plan to do right from the beginning. And no matter how we change it around or discuss it, it's a fait accompli. They're doing right where they want it to be. And, and we knew that they could have changed that route very simply by redirecting it south of Visitors Dock and going around the park. And they knew that, and we knew right from the very beginning, from the Greenwich projects, that they could have put junction boxes, maybe one, maybe two, in the same fashion that they did on what's the park? Bruce Park. Was it Bruce Park? The cables went through in Greenwich. I think it was Bruce Park, you know, where they had something in the nature of 15 splice boxes, where they told us that they couldn't put any splice boxes in. So, well,
They
Thank
also said, you know, we also said go north of the Stropolino. And they didn't want to do that either. I mean, they weren't going to do anything except what they wanted, and they didn't care.
Yeah, if you remember early on, some of their slides included their cost, as if we should care a lot about that. So.
well,
that's why
we
that-
know what that cost means. That cost is turned out to the general public. And
Absolutely.
they can recapture that cost in a matter of, what is it, five years? Where they can float a $20, I'm sorry, 20-year
Bond.
bond, yeah. So that very disingenuous of that company all the way around. They're not playing, I'm sure it's very dishonest as far as I'm concerned.
You know, in a way, what we should do is, which would be a smart thing to do is, okay, you have this zone you want. We want you, when we make a design, you hire the people and you pay for that area to be done, since we can't touch it.
Well, you're not gonna be able
If we
to.
decide to do
something. There's,
No, we can't, but they can.
well, I'm not sure, what do you mean they can?
Well, let's say we want to configure our docks and put pilings somewhere else.
Well, that's where a redesign would come in, Peter, where you would pay someone whatever an astronomical amount of money to look in that and how that would be accomplished.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is, no matter what it costs, we should have Eversource cover that, whatever that buffer zone is and stuff.
Well, that's the goal. That's
Yes.
that's the goal we're looking for.
Okay.
That's the goal, yeah.
So thanks everyone for the lively discussion. Much appreciated. And
Yeah.
I think constructive. Before we leave the topics of the bridge and Eversource, I'd just like to thank Bill Mooney for his diligence in asking Eversource to attend our meetings. And we were rebuffed. Maybe they're watching now live. If they are, hello. We miss you. It would have been nice to have you here if you're just watching on YouTube. One other bit of new business. And Bill, if you would, please, if you could ping Tim DeBartolomeo. a couple of months back, we tentatively approved his application that he was the agent for with a couple of changes, and we never received those changes. So if he could get that to us, I'd like to get that off of our plate so that he could move forward. They were pretty reasonable about everything else.
I will do that. I will reach out to him, try tomorrow, but if not, next week, certainly.
Sounds great, Bill. Under new business, would just like to ask Chairman Dr. Pino and Chairman Kibbe about the Norwalk Harbor Management Commission ARC and regular Harbor Management Commission meeting separation and where we are with that. And I want to thank Dr. Pino especially for including me / us on the COPs that we wouldn't normally see. So during his meetings, I appreciate being able to comment on them. So guys, if you would, please.
Well, that was discussion. Well, Alan, you brought that
Yeah,
up.
I've been trying to talk with the folks at City Hall, and I think we're clear to go back and have the our application review committee meeting at 6 o'clock, perhaps at just the application review committee. Certainly any harbor commissioners that want to attend and anyone else want to sit in on that are certainly welcome. It's a public meeting. It's going to be recorded, just like it always has been. I've just had a lot of commissioners say, I don't know anything about this stuff. I'd rather come at 7:15 or so and participate in the regular meeting and hear the recommendation of the application review committee and vote then. So that's something we might try doing, once to see how it,
Yep,
see
we
how it
still-
works.
Yep, oh, go ahead. Okay. Anything else on that or any other new business? Hearing none.
Steve, excuse
To say that
me.
our next meeting is August 3rd, 2023. Please, Bill.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
just wanted to revisit some business back from May. When the commission had approved the $3,000 to go to the Harbor Commission for the summer interns. However, in the minutes, it kind of was written in as insurance. And so for me to be able to transfer it, it has to be in the minutes so that I can do so. So if I could ask you to revisit that and approve the $3,000 transfer to Harbor Commission for the summer intern program for the payment of their salaries, then I can get that started.
Outstanding, no problem. Pete, would you move that?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to correct it, that we're going to do 3,000 to the Harbor Management Commission for the internship on water quality.
Outstanding. Best money we spend for not just practical use, but our future biologists and chemists as well. Commissioner Sachs, electronic hand would be fine. Thank you, sir. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that passes. Thanks, Bill, for bringing that up.
Thanks very much.
So permits are on sale at Fisherman's World. As Sergeant Bisegli mentioned, the shellfishing is currently closed. You can check this weekend on our hotline at 203-838-9807 and Eat Norwalk Shellfish. And if there are no other comments or questions, a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion.
Thank you, Pete, and Commissioner Sachs.
He makes the motion.
And it is second, and all in favor.
Aye.
We'll see everyone August 3rd. Thank you all for coming.
Everyone have a good night.
Bye,
Thank
Steve. Nice seeing you.
Likewise.
Good to see you guys.
meeting, guys.
Be good.
Very good meeting. Thank you, guys.